A shocking crime you won't believe, and the truth is even darker than you think. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe for more mind-blowing stories. Let's dive in. The morning of October 12th, 2023, started like any other in the small town of Willow Creek. The sun rose over the dense forest that surrounded the town, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. But by midday, the tranquility was shattered. Margaret Maggie Thompson, the beloved local accountant, had vanished without a trace. Maggie was a fixture in Willow Creek. At 45, she had been the town's accountant for over 2 decades, handling everything from personal taxes to the finances of local businesses. She was known for her meticulous nature, her warm smile, and her unwavering reliability. So, when she didn't show up for a scheduled meeting with the mayor, alarm bells started ringing. The investigation began at Maggie's office, a quaint little space above the town's bakery. The door was unlocked, and her computer was still on, displaying a spreadsheet filled with numbers that made no sense to the untrained eye. Her purse was on the desk, her phone inside, but there was no sign of Maggie. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She noticed something odd immediately. The office was too neat. Maggie's desk was always cluttered with papers, but now it was spotless. The filing cabinets were locked, and the keys were missing. News of Maggie's disappearance spread quickly through Willow Creek. The town was in shock. How could someone so integral to their community just vanish? Vigils were held, and search parties scoured the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of her. As the days passed, rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that Maggie had been involved in something shady, that her disappearance was no accident. Others refused to believe it, insisting that Maggie was a victim of foul play. Detective Collins decided to dig deeper into Maggie's professional life. She requested access to the financial records of the town and the local businesses Maggie handled. What she found was staggering. Over the past 5 years, nearly $3 million had gone missing from various accounts. The numbers didn't add up. Transactions that should have been straightforward were convoluted, with funds being shuffled between accounts in a way that made no sense. It was clear that someone had been embezzling money, and all signs pointed to Maggie. With the financial discrepancies uncovered, Maggie quickly became the prime suspect. But Detective Collins wasn't convinced. Maggie had no history of criminal behavior, and her colleagues describe her as honest to a fault. Why would she risk everything for money? Collins decided to look into Maggie's personal life. She visited Maggie's home, a modest house on the outskirts of town. Inside, she found more questions than answers. The house was immaculate, but there were signs of a struggle in the kitchen. A broken vase, a chair knocked over, and a faint smear of blood on the counter. As the investigation continued, a new lead emerged. A local man, Tom Reynolds, had been seen arguing with Maggie the night before her disappearance. Tom was known to have a temper, and he had a history of run-ins with the law. He quickly became a person of interest, but when questioned, Tom denied any involvement in Maggie's disappearance. He admitted to the argument, but claimed it was about a personal matter, nothing more. Detective Collins wasn't convinced, but she had no evidence to link him to the crime. The breakthrough came when a forensic accountant was brought in to analyze the financial records. They discovered that the embezzlement scheme was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. The money had been funneled through a series of offshore accounts, making it nearly impossible to trace. But there was one mistake: a single transaction that had been routed through a local bank. The account belonged to a shell company, but the name on the paperwork was familiar: Richard Thompson, Maggie's estranged husband. Richard Thompson had left Willow Creek 5 years earlier, after a bitter divorce from Maggie. He had moved to the city, where he worked as a financial consultant. Detective Collins tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. Richard was calm and collected, but there was a coldness in his eyes. He denied any involvement in embezzlement or Maggie's disappearance, but his alibi was shaky. He claimed to have been out of town on business, but there were no records to confirm his whereabouts. Just as the case seemed to be closing in on Richard, a new piece of evidence emerged. A security camera from a gas station on the outskirts of town had captured footage of Maggie's car on the night of her disappearance. But she wasn't alone. There was a passenger in the car, someone who looked remarkably like Tom Reynolds. Detective Collins was baffled. Why would Tom be in Maggie's car? And why had he lied about his involvement? She decided to bring Tom in for another round of questioning. Under intense pressure, Tom finally broke. He confessed to being involved in the embezzlement scheme, but he insisted that Maggie had been the mastermind. According to Tom, Maggie had approached him with a plan, promising him a cut of the money in exchange for his help. But things had gone wrong. On the night of her disappearance, Maggie had panicked, fearing that the authorities were closing in. She had tried to cut Tom out, and in a fit of rage, he had attacked her. He claimed that he hadn't meant to kill her, but when she fell and hit her head, he panicked and disposed of her body in the woods. Detective Collins was skeptical. Tom's story didn't add up, and there were still too many unanswered questions. But with his confession, the case took a dramatic turn, and the hunt for Maggie's body began. With Tom's confession, the search for Maggie's body intensified. Search parties combed the dense woods surrounding Willow Creek, but days turned into weeks with no sign of her. The community was on edge, and the pressure on Detective Collins was mounting. Despite Tom's confession, Collins couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The financial record suggested a level of sophistication that Tom, a small-time crook, couldn't have managed on his own. She decided to dig deeper into Richard Thompson's background. Richard Thompson had a history of financial fraud. Before moving to Willow Creek, he had been involved in several shady business deals, though nothing had ever been proven. Detective Collins wondered if he had used Maggie's position to launder money, framing her for the embezzlement. She requested a warrant to search Richard's apartment in the city. What she found was a treasure trove of evidence: bank statements, fake IDs, and a ledger detailing the embezzlement scheme. It was clear that Richard had been the mastermind, using Maggie's access to funnel money into his own accounts. Armed with the new evidence, Detective Collins confronted Richard. At first, he denied everything, but as she laid out the evidence, his facade began to crack. He admitted to the embezzlement, but insisted that Maggie had been a willing participant. According to Richard, Maggie had discovered his scheme and threatened to go to the authorities. In a panic, he had arranged for Tom to take care of her. He claimed that he never intended for her to be killed, but things had spiraled out of control. With Richard's confession, the search for Maggie's body took on new urgency. Finally, after weeks of searching, a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in the woods. The remains were badly decomposed, but dental records confirmed that it was Maggie. The discovery sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The town mourned the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of the community, while grappling with the betrayal of those they had trusted. The trial of Richard Thompson and Tom Reynolds was a media sensation. The prosecution painted a picture of greed and betrayal, while the defense argued that Richard had been coerced into confessing. Tom, meanwhile, tried to shift the blame onto Richard, claiming that he had been manipulated into participating in the scheme. The jury didn't buy it. Both men were found guilty of embezzlement and murder. Richard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Tom received a slightly lighter sentence due to his cooperation with the investigation. In the wake of the trial, Willow Creek was left to pick up the pieces. The town's finances were in shambles, and trust in local institutions had been shattered. Detective Collins, though hailed as a hero, couldn't shake the feeling that justice had only been partially served. Maggie's family, devastated by her loss, struggled to move on. Her daughter, Emily, became an advocate for victims of financial crimes, working to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate as her mother. Despite the convictions, there were still unanswered questions. How had Richard managed to manipulate Maggie into participating in the scheme? What had driven Tom to violence? And was there more to the story that had yet to come to light? Detective Collins continued to dig, determined to uncover the full truth. But as the months passed, the case grew cold, and the answers remained elusive. Maggie's legacy lived on in Willow Creek. A memorial was erected in her honor, and the town rallied to rebuild its finances and restore trust in its institutions. But the scars of the crime would never fully heal. For Detective Collins, the case was a reminder of the complexities of human nature. It was a story of greed, betrayal, and the lengths people would go to for money. But it was also a story of resilience, of a community coming together in the face of tragedy. Years later, a new piece of evidence emerged. A letter written by Maggie before her death was found hidden in her home. In it, she confessed to her involvement in the embezzlement scheme, but claimed that she had been coerced by Richard. She wrote of her fear, her regret, and her hope that one day the truth would come out. The letter was a bombshell, reopening old wounds and raising new questions. Had Maggie been a victim, or had she been a willing participant? The truth, it seemed, was more complicated than anyone had realized. In the end, the case of Maggie Thompson remained a mystery. The letter provided some closure, but also raised new questions that would never be answered. Detective Collins, now retired, reflected on the case with a mix of pride and frustration. She had solved the crime, but the full truth had eluded her. For the people of Willow Creek, the case was a reminder of the fragility of trust and the dangers of greed. It was a story that would be told for generations, a cautionary tale of what happens when money becomes more important than people. And for Maggie, it was a tragic end to a life that had once been full of promise. Her story was a reminder that even the most trusted among us can fall victim to the temptations of greed, and that the pursuit of justice is never as straightforward as it seems. The discovery of Maggie's letter sent shockwaves through Willow Creek once again. The town had just begun to heal from the trauma of her disappearance and the subsequent trial, but the letter reopened old wounds. The media descended on the small town, and the case was back in the national spotlight. Detective Sarah Collins, now retired, was drawn back into the fray. She had always felt that there were unanswered questions, and the letter confirmed her suspicions. Maggie's words painted a picture of a woman trapped in a web of deceit, manipulated by the man she had once loved. With the letter in hand, Detective Collins decided to re-examine the evidence from the original investigation. She requested access to the case files and began poring over every detail. The financial records, the witness statements, the forensic reports, everything was scrutinized anew. One detail stood out: a series of emails between Maggie and Richard that had been recovered from her computer. The emails were cryptic, but they hinted at a deeper level of manipulation. Richard had been gaslighting Maggie, making her doubt her own sanity and convincing her that she had no choice but to go along with his scheme. As Detective Collins dug deeper, she began to suspect that Richard and Tom weren't the only ones involved. The embezzlement scheme was too complex for them to have pulled off alone. There had to be someone else, someone with the financial expertise to orchestrate the entire operation. Her attention turned to a local businessman, James Carter. James was a wealthy entrepreneur who had been one of Maggie's clients. He had a reputation for being ruthless in business, and there were rumors that he had ties to organized crime. Detective Collins wondered if he had been the mastermind behind the scheme, using Richard and Tom as pawns. Detective Collins arranged to meet with James Carter under the guise of a routine follow-up. She questioned him about his relationship with Maggie and his knowledge of the embezzlement scheme. James was calm and collected, but there was a tension in the air. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had been just as shocked as everyone else when the scheme was uncovered. But Detective Collins wasn't convinced. She pressed him, pointing out inconsistencies in his story and presenting the evidence she had gathered. The breakthrough came when Detective Collins received a tip from an anonymous source. The source claimed that James Carter had been laundering money through Maggie's accounts for years, using her as a front for his illegal activities. The tip led Detective Collins to a hidden safe in James's office, where she found a ledger detailing the entire operation. The ledger was a smoking gun. It listed every transaction, every account, and every person involved in the scheme. James Carter's name was at the top of the list, followed by Richard Thompson and Tom Reynolds. But there were other names as well, names that Detective Collins didn't recognize. The ledger revealed a vast network of corruption that extended far beyond Willow Creek. James Carter had been working with a group of financiers, politicians, and criminals to launder money and embezzle funds on a massive scale. Maggie had been just one piece of the puzzle, a small-town accountant caught in a web of deceit. Detective Collins realized that the case was far bigger than she had imagined. She contacted the FBI, and a joint task force was formed to investigate the network. The scope of the operation was staggering, and it would take months, if not years, to unravel the full extent of the corruption. With the evidence from the ledger, the task force moved quickly to make arrests. James Carter was the first to be taken into custody, followed by several of his associates. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, and the media coverage was relentless. Richard Thompson and Tom Reynolds were brought back into the spotlight as well. Both men were questioned about their involvement in the larger scheme, and both claimed that they had been manipulated by James Carter. Richard, in particular, seemed to relish the opportunity to shift the blame onto someone else. The trial of James Carter and his associates was a media circus. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including the ledger, the emails, and testimony from Richard and Tom. The defense argued that James had been set up, that the evidence had been fabricated, and that he was the victim of a witch hunt. But the jury wasn't convinced. James Carter was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a sentence that sent a clear message to anyone involved in similar schemes. The fallout from the trial was far-reaching. The town of Willow Creek was left to grapple with the realization that the corruption had extended far beyond Maggie's case. Local businesses that had been involved in the scheme were shut down, and several politicians were forced to resign. Detective Collins, though retired, continued to work with the task force to uncover the full extent of the network. She was determined to ensure that everyone involved was brought to justice, no matter how powerful or well-connected they were. In the end, the case of Maggie Thompson became a symbol of the dangers of greed and corruption. Her story was a reminder that even the most trusted among us can fall victim to the temptations of money, and that the pursuit of justice is never as straightforward as it seems. For Detective Collins, the case was a testament to the importance of perseverance and integrity. She had faced countless obstacles, but she had never given up, and in the end, she had uncovered the truth, not just for Maggie, but for the entire community. The town of Willow Creek, though scarred by the events, emerged stronger and more united. Maggie's memory lived on, a reminder of the importance of trust, honesty, and the fight for justice. And for Detective Collins, the case was a fitting end to a career dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The conviction of James Carter and the unraveling of the embezzlement network sent shockwaves far beyond Willow Creek. The case became a national talking point, with media outlets dissecting every detail. The FBI's investigation into the larger network of corruption revealed ties to organized crime, offshore accounts, and even high-profile politicians. The town of Willow Creek, once a quiet, unassuming place, was now at the center of a sprawling scandal. Detective Sarah Collins, though officially retired, found herself pulled back into the fray. The FBI requested her expertise to help navigate the complex web of financial records and connections. She agreed, driven by a sense of duty and the nagging feeling that there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. As the task force dug deeper, they discovered something unsettling. Not all the embezzled money had been accounted for. A significant portion, nearly $1 million, had been funneled into an offshore account with no clear owner. The account was under a pseudonym, E. Blackwood, and the trail went cold after that. Detective Collins became obsessed with uncovering the identity of E. Blackwood. Who was this mysterious beneficiary, and what role had they played in the scheme? She began to suspect that this person might have been the true mastermind, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The search for E. Blackwood proved to be a frustrating dead end. The offshore account was registered in a country with strict banking secrecy laws, and the FBI's requests for information were met with resistance. Detective Collins, however, refused to give up. She began reaching out to her network of contacts, including former colleagues and informants, hoping to find a lead. One name kept coming up in her conversations: Eleanor Blackwood, a reclusive financier who had disappeared from the public eye years earlier. Eleanor had been a rising star in the financial world before vanishing under mysterious circumstances. Could she be the E. Blackwood they were looking for? Detective Collins tracked down Eleanor Blackwood to a remote estate in the mountains of Colorado. The property was heavily guarded, and Eleanor was notoriously private, but Collins managed to secure a meeting through a mutual acquaintance. When she arrived, she was struck by the stark contrast between the opulence of the estate and the woman who lived there. Eleanor Blackwood was a shadow of her former self. Once a vibrant and ambitious woman, she now appeared frail and haunted. She agreed to speak with Collins, but was evasive when questioned about the offshore account. Collins sensed that Eleanor was hiding something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. After hours of conversation, Eleanor finally broke down. She confessed that she had been involved in the embezzlement scheme, but not by choice. Years earlier, she had been blackmailed by James Carter, who had threatened to expose her involvement in a separate financial scandal if she didn't help him launder money. Eleanor had agreed, hoping to protect her reputation, but the guilt had consumed her. She had tried to cut ties with Carter, but he had continued to manipulate her, using her connections to expand the network. The offshore account had been her attempt to hide some of the money, hoping to use it to start a new life away from the corruption. Eleanor's confession was a turning point in the investigation. She agreed to cooperate with the FBI, providing them with detailed information about the network's operations. Her testimony led to the arrest of several high-profile individuals, including a senator and a prominent banker. For Detective Collins, the case was a reminder of the human cost of greed and corruption. Eleanor Blackwood had been a victim as much as a perpetrator, caught in a web of manipulation and deceit. Collins couldn't help but feel a sense of empathy for the woman, even as she acknowledged the harm she had caused. With Eleanor's cooperation, the task force was able to trace the remaining embezzled funds. The money was recovered and returned to the victims, including the town of Willow Creek. The case was finally coming to a close, but Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. She returned to Maggie's letter, reading it over and over again. There was a line that had always bothered her. "There are things I can't say, secrets that go deeper than you can imagine." What had Maggie been trying to tell them? What secrets had she taken to her grave? Detective Collins decided to revisit Maggie's home one last time. She had searched the house thoroughly during the initial investigation, but something told her to look again. This time, she focused on the basement, a cramped, dimly lit space that had been largely overlooked. After hours of searching, she found a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the wall. Inside was a small safe, its contents untouched for years. Collins opened it carefully, revealing a stack of documents and a USB drive. The documents were a bombshell. They detailed a second embezzlement scheme, one that had been running parallel to the first. This scheme involved a different group of individuals, including several high-ranking officials in the state government. The USB drive contained encrypted files, but Collins was able to access them with the help of a tech-savvy colleague. The files revealed that Maggie had been gathering evidence against the second network, hoping to expose them, but before she could act, she had been silenced. The documents included names, dates, and transactions, providing a roadmap for the FBI to follow. The discovery of the second scheme marked the final chapter in the case. The FBI launched a new investigation, leading to the arrest of several powerful individuals. The case became a landmark in the fight against corruption, prompting reforms in financial regulation and government oversight. For Detective Collins, the case was a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of seeking the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Maggie Thompson's legacy lived on, not just as a victim, but as a whistleblower who had risked everything to expose the corruption. The town of Willow Creek, though scarred by the events, emerged stronger and more united. Maggie's memory became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. And for Detective Collins, the case was a fitting end to a career dedicated to uncovering the truth. She had faced countless obstacles, but she had never given up, and in the end, she had uncovered the truth, not just for Maggie, but for the entire community. The shadows of the past had been brought into the light, and the town could finally begin to heal. The discovery of the second embezzlement scheme sent shockwaves through the state government. The FBI's new investigation, dubbed Operation Blackwood, targeted high-ranking officials, lobbyists, and business leaders. The evidence Maggie had hidden in her basement was a treasure trove of information, detailing a web of corruption that extended far beyond Willow Creek. Detective Sarah Collins, though officially retired, was asked to consult on the case. Her expertise and determination had been instrumental in uncovering the first scheme, and the FBI hoped she could help bring the second one to light. Collins agreed, driven by a sense of justice and the memory of Maggie's sacrifice. The documents Maggie had hidden revealed the names of several powerful individuals involved in the second scheme. Among them was Governor Robert Hargrove, a charismatic and well-liked politician who had been in office for over a decade. Hargrove had always presented himself as a champion of transparency and accountability, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Also implicated was Linda Carmichael, a prominent lobbyist with ties to several major corporations. Carmichael was known for her influence and connections, and her involvement in the scheme raised questions about the extent of corporate corruption. The FBI moved quickly to bring the implicated individuals in for questioning. Governor Hargrove was the first to be interrogated. He denied any involvement in the scheme, claiming that the evidence against him had been fabricated. But as the agents presented the documents and transactions, his facade began to crack. Linda Carmichael was more evasive. She admitted to knowing about the scheme, but claimed that she had been coerced into participating. She pointed the finger at Governor Hargrove, alleging that he had been the mastermind behind the operation. The arrests of Governor Hargrove and Linda Carmichael made national headlines. The media descended on the state capitol, and the case became a focal point of public discourse. Protests erupted, demanding accountability and transparency from the government. Detective Collins found herself in the spotlight once again. She gave several interviews, emphasizing the importance of Maggie's role in uncovering the corruption. Collins became a symbol of the fight against corruption, a reminder that even the most powerful could be brought to justice. The trial of Governor Hargrove and Linda Carmichael was a media circus. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including the documents Maggie had hidden, financial records, and testimony from whistleblowers. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that their clients had been set up, but the jury wasn't convinced. Governor Hargrove was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Linda Carmichael was also convicted, though she received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation. The convictions of Governor Hargrove and Linda Carmichael had far-reaching consequences. The state government was thrown into chaos, with several officials resigning in the wake of the scandal. Reforms were implemented to increase transparency and accountability, and new laws were passed to prevent similar schemes in the future. For Detective Collins, the case was a reminder of the importance of vigilance and integrity. She had faced countless obstacles, but she had never given up. And in the end, she had uncovered the truth, not just for Maggie, but for the entire community. Maggie Thompson's legacy lived on. Her bravery and determination had exposed a web of corruption that had gone unnoticed for years. A memorial was erected in her honor in Willow Creek, and her story became a symbol of the fight against corruption. Detective Collins, though retired, continued to advocate for justice and transparency. She wrote a book about the case, detailing the investigation and the lessons she had learned. The book became a bestseller, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for the truth. The town of Willow Creek, though scarred by the events, emerged stronger and more united. The community rallied together, determined to rebuild and move forward. Local businesses flourished, and the town became a model of transparency and accountability. For Maggie's family, the case was a bittersweet victory. They had lost a beloved mother and friend, but they took solace in the fact that her sacrifice had not been in vain. Maggie's daughter, Emily, became an advocate for victims of financial crimes, working to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate as her mother. Years later, Detective Collins returned to Willow Creek for the unveiling of a new memorial dedicated to Maggie. The town had come a long way since the dark days of the scandal, and the memorial was a testament to their resilience and determination. As Collins stood before the memorial, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The case had been one of the most challenging of her career, but it had also been the most rewarding. She had uncovered the truth, brought the guilty to justice, and honored the memory of a woman who had risked everything for the sake of justice. The case of Maggie Thompson and the embezzlement schemes had left an indelible mark on Willow Creek and the state as a whole, but it had also sparked a movement for change. People were more aware of the dangers of corruption, and they were more willing to stand up and fight for what was right. For Detective Collins, the case was a reminder of the power of perseverance and the importance of seeking the truth. She had faced countless obstacles, but she had never given up, and in the end, she had uncovered the truth, not just for Maggie, but for the entire community. As she walked away from the memorial, Collins felt a sense of closure. The shadows of the past had been brought into the light, and the town could finally begin to heal. Maggie's memory would live on, a reminder of the importance of trust, honesty, and the fight for justice. And for Detective Collins, the case was a fitting end to a career dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The convictions of Governor Hargrove and Linda Carmichael marked the end of a long and arduous journey for Detective Sarah Collins and the town of Willow Creek. But the echoes of the case continued to reverberate. The state government, now under new leadership, implemented sweeping reforms to prevent future corruption. Transparency became the new norm, and whistleblowers were encouraged to come forward without fear of retribution. Detective Collins, now a celebrated figure, found herself in high demand. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and law enforcement agencies, sharing her experiences and the lessons she had learned. Despite her newfound fame, Collins remained grounded, always remembering the human cost of the case and the bravery of Maggie Thompson. Despite the closure brought by the trials, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that there was still unfinished business. The offshore account under the name E. Blackwood had been partially resolved with Eleanor Blackwood's cooperation, but not all the money had been recovered. Collins suspected that there were still individuals involved who had managed to evade justice. She decided to take matters into her own hands, using her network of contacts to dig deeper. Her investigation led her to a small, private bank in Switzerland, where the remaining funds were believed to be held. Collins knew that accessing these funds would be a challenge, but she was determined to see it through. Detective Collins traveled to Switzerland, where she met with a former colleague who had expertise in international finance. Together, they worked to navigate the complex legal landscape of Swiss banking secrecy. It was a slow and frustrating process, but Collins' persistence paid off when they finally gained access to the account. The account contained not only the remaining embezzled funds, but also a detailed ledger of transactions. The ledger revealed that several high-profile individuals, including a prominent European businessman and a former diplomat, had been involved in the scheme. Collins knew that this new information would require international cooperation to bring those involved to justice. Detective Collins presented her findings to the FBI, who in turn reached out to Interpol. A joint task force was formed, comprising agents from multiple countries. The investigation was complex and required navigating different legal systems and jurisdictions, but the team was determined to see it through. Collins worked closely with the task force, providing insights and guidance based on her experience. The investigation uncovered a global network of corruption with ties to organized crime, corporate espionage, and even terrorist financing. The scope of the operation was staggering, and it became clear that this was just the tip of the iceberg. The task force moved swiftly to make arrests. The prominent European businessman Klaus Reinhardt was taken into custody in Germany. The former diplomat, Sir Reginald Whittaker, was arrested in the UK. Both men denied any involvement, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The arrest made international headlines, and the case became a symbol of global cooperation in the fight against corruption. Detective Collins was hailed as a hero, but she remained focused on the task at hand. There were still more individuals to be brought to justice, and she was determined to see it through. The trial of Klaus Reinhardt and Sir Reginald Whittaker was a landmark event, held in The Hague. It was one of the first major cases to be prosecuted under new international anti-corruption laws. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including the ledger from the Swiss account, financial records, and testimony from whistleblowers. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that their clients had been set up, but the jury wasn't convinced. Both men were found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, sending a clear message to anyone involved in similar schemes. As the international case came to a close, Detective Collins returned to Willow Creek. The town had continued to heal, and Maggie Thompson's legacy was stronger than ever. A scholarship fund had been established in her name, providing financial assistance to students pursuing careers in accounting and finance. Collins visited Maggie's memorial, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Maggie's bravery and determination had sparked a global movement for justice, and her memory would live on as a symbol of the fight against corruption. Despite the success of the investigation, Detective Collins couldn't ignore the personal toll it had taken. The long hours, the constant pressure, and the emotional weight of the case had left her exhausted. She realized that it was time to step back and focus on her own well-being. Collins decided to take a break from consulting and public speaking. She spent time with her family, reconnecting with loved ones and rediscovering the simple joys of life. It was a much-needed respite, and it gave her the strength to consider what she wanted to do next. After a year of rest and reflection, Detective Collins felt ready to embark on a new chapter. She decided to write a memoir, detailing her experiences and the lessons she had learned. The book, titled Echoes of Justice, became a bestseller, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for the truth. Collins also founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and victims of financial crimes. The organization provided legal assistance, counseling, and financial support to those who had been affected by corruption. It was a way for Collins to give back and continue the fight for justice. As Detective Collins stood before Maggie's memorial one last time, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The case had been one of the most challenging of her career, but it had also been the most rewarding. She had uncovered the truth, brought the guilty to justice, and honored the memory of a woman who had risked everything for the sake of justice. The echoes of the case would continue to resonate, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for what was right. Maggie's legacy would live on, a reminder of the importance of trust, honesty, and the fight for justice. And for Detective Collins, the case was a fitting end to a career dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. As she walked away from the memorial, Collins felt a sense of closure. The shadows of the past had been brought into the light, and the town could finally begin to heal. Maggie's memory would live on, a reminder of the importance of trust, honesty, and the fight for justice. And for Detective Collins, the case was a fitting end to a career dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Years after the resolution of the Maggie Thompson case, Detective Sarah Collins had settled into a quieter life. Her nonprofit organization, Echoes of Justice, was thriving, helping whistleblowers and victims of financial crimes rebuild their lives. But just as she thought her days of high-stakes investigations were behind her, a new threat emerged. A series of anonymous letters began arriving at Collins's office. The letters were cryptic, filled with references to the Maggie Thompson case and veiled threats. The writer claimed to have knowledge of a hidden layer to the embezzlement scheme, one that even Collins had failed to uncover. The letters ended with a chilling warning. The shadows are deeper than you think. The letters contained a single clue, a reference to a small, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Collins, intrigued and unsettled, decided to investigate. She enlisted the help of her former colleague, Detective Mark Harris, who had worked with her on the original case. The warehouse was dilapidated, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in graffiti. Inside, they found a hidden compartment in the floor, containing a USB drive and a stack of old documents. The documents were financial records, but they didn't match any of the accounts Collins had seen before. The USB drive contained encrypted files, which Collins took to a trusted tech expert to decode. The decrypted files revealed a shocking truth. The embezzlement scheme had been even larger than anyone had realized. A separate network, operating in parallel to the one Collins had uncovered, had been siphoning funds for years. This network was more sophisticated, using advanced encryption and offshore accounts to hide its activities. The documents implicated several new individuals, including a high-ranking official in the Department of Justice and a billionaire tech entrepreneur. Collins realized that this network had been operating in the shadows, using the original scheme as a decoy to cover its tracks. As Collins delved deeper into the new network, she received a phone call from an anonymous source. The caller, a former employee of the tech entrepreneur, claimed to have evidence of the network's activities but was too afraid to come forward. Collins arranged a secret meeting, promising the whistleblower protection in exchange for their cooperation. The whistleblower provided Collins with a trove of documents, including emails, transaction records, and a list of names. The evidence was damning, but it also put Collins in danger. The network was powerful, and its members would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Collins and Harris began piecing together the evidence, but they were not alone. They noticed they were being followed, and her offices were broken into. The network was closing in, and Collins knew she had to act fast. She reached out to her contacts in the FBI, who agreed to help. Together, they launched a covert operation to bring down the network. The operation was risky, involving undercover agents, surveillance, and high-stakes confrontations. Collins found herself back in the field, using all her skills to stay one step ahead of the enemy. As the investigation progressed, Collins began to suspect that there was a mole within the FBI. Key pieces of evidence went missing, and their operations were repeatedly compromised. The network seemed to know their every move. Collins confronted her FBI contact, Agent Laura Mitchell, who admitted that she had been pressured to leak information. Mitchell revealed that the network had blackmailed her, threatening her family if she didn't cooperate. Collins, torn between anger and empathy, decided to use Mitchell's position to their advantage, feeding the network false information to lure them into a trap. The trap was set. Collins and the FBI staged a fake operation, pretending to raid a location where they claimed to have found incriminating evidence. The network took the bait, sending their operatives to intercept the raid. But Collins and the FBI were waiting. A tense standoff ensued, culminating in a dramatic confrontation. The network's operatives were arrested, and Collins finally came face to face with the mastermind, a shadowy figure known only as the Architect. The Architect, a former intelligence officer, had orchestrated the entire scheme, using his expertise to stay hidden for years. During interrogation, the Architect revealed the full extent of the network's activities. The embezzlement scheme was just one part of a larger operation involving corporate espionage, political manipulation, and even cyber warfare. The Architect claimed that the network was untouchable, protected by powerful allies and governments around the world. Collins, undeterred, pressed him for names, but the Architect remained defiant, taunting her with cryptic hints about the real power behind the throne. Collins realized that the fight was far from over. The arrest of the Architect and his operatives made international headlines, but the revelations about the network's activities sparked a global crisis. Governments scrambled to investigate their own officials, and corporations faced scrutiny over their ties to the network. The case became a turning point in the fight against global corruption. For Collins, the victory was bittersweet. She had brought down a powerful enemy, but the Architect's words haunted her. She knew that there were still shadows lurking in the darkness, waiting to be uncovered. Collins returned to Willow Creek, where she was greeted as a hero, but she knew that her work was far from done. The fight against corruption was a never-ending battle, and she was determined to keep fighting. As she stood before Maggie's memorial, Collins reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Maggie's bravery had inspired her to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. And now, Collins would continue that legacy, shining a light into the shadows and fighting for justice. The echoes of the case would continue to resonate, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for what was right. And for Detective Sarah Collins, the fight was just beginning. Detective Sarah Collins couldn't shake the words of the Architect from her mind. His cryptic warning about the real power behind the throne lingered like a storm cloud. Despite the arrest and the dismantling of the immediate network, Collins knew the fight was far from over. She began to dig deeper, using her nonprofit organization, Echoes of Justice, as a front to investigate the global conspiracy hinted at by the Architect. Her first step was to re-examine the evidence from the original case, looking for connections she might have missed. She enlisted the help of a young, brilliant data analyst named Priya Kapoor, who had a knack for uncovering hidden patterns in complex datasets. Priya spent weeks analyzing the financial records, emails, and transaction logs from the case. One night, she called Collins with a breakthrough. She had discovered a recurring pattern, a series of transactions that led to a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. The company, named Elysian Holdings, had no visible ties to the original network, but its transactions aligned perfectly with the timeline of the embezzlement scheme. Collins and Priya dug deeper, uncovering a web of connections between Elysian Holdings and several high-profile individuals, including politicians, CEOs, and even a prominent media mogul. It was clear that Elysian Holdings was a front for something much larger. One name stood out among the connections: Victor Langston, the billionaire owner of Langston Media Group. Langston was a powerful figure, known for his influence over global media and his close ties to world leaders. Collins suspected that he might be the real power behind the throne that the architect had hinted at. She began investigating Langston, but it was no easy task. His empire was vast, and his resources were seemingly limitless. Every lead she pursued seemed to hit a dead end, and she began to suspect that Langston was aware of her investigation. One evening, as Collins was leaving her office, she found a package waiting for her on her car. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Stop digging. You don't know what you're dealing with." The warning was unsigned, but Collins knew it had to be from Langston or someone in his network. Instead of backing down, Collins became more determined than ever. She reached out to an old friend, investigative journalist Marcus Reed, who had spent years exposing corruption in high places. Reed agreed to help, using his connections to dig into Langston's past. Marcus Reed's investigation uncovered a shocking revelation. Victor Langston had been involved in a covert operation during the Cold War, working with intelligence agencies to manipulate global media and influence political outcomes. After the Cold War ended, Langston had continued the operation in secret, using his media empire to shape public opinion and protect his allies. Reed also discovered that Langston had ties to a shadowy organization known as the Syndicate, a global network of powerful individuals who operated above the law. The Syndicate's activities ranged from political manipulation to corporate espionage, and they were rumored to have orchestrated several high-profile assassinations. Collins and Reed realized that they were dealing with something far bigger than they had imagined. The Syndicate was a hydra, cut off one head, and two more would take its place. They knew that taking down Langston and the Syndicate would require more than just evidence. It would require a coordinated, global effort. Collins reached out to her contacts in the FBI and Interpol, but she was met with resistance. Many officials were either too afraid to act or had been compromised by the Syndicate. Collins realized that she would have to operate outside the system, relying on a small, trusted team to bring down the network. Collins assembled a team of allies, including Priya Kapoor, Marcus Reed, and a former intelligence officer named Jack Harper, who had gone rogue after discovering the extent of the Syndicate's influence. Together, they began planning their next move. Their first target was a high-ranking member of the Syndicate, a former diplomat named Evelyn Cross. Cross had been implicated in several of the Syndicate's operations, and Collins believed that she could provide the evidence they needed to expose the network. The team launched a covert operation to intercept Cross during a secret meeting in Vienna. The operation was risky, but it paid off. They managed to capture Cross and recover a cache of documents detailing the Syndicate's activities. Among the documents was a list of members, including Victor Langston and several other high-profile individuals. Cross, under interrogation, revealed that the Syndicate had been planning a major operation to destabilize several governments and seize control of key industries. The operation, codenamed Project Eclipse, was set to launch in 6 months. With the clock ticking, Collins and her team worked tirelessly to expose the Syndicate before Project Eclipse could be launched. They leaked documents to the press, coordinated with whistleblowers, and applied pressure on governments to act. The revelation sparked a global outcry, with protests erupting in cities around the world. Governments were forced to investigate their own officials, and several high-profile arrests were made. But Victor Langston remained elusive, using his media empire to spin the narrative and discredit the leaks. Collins and her team tracked Langston to a private island in the Caribbean, where he was holding a secret meeting with other members of the Syndicate. The team launched a daring raid, catching Langston and his allies off guard. In a tense confrontation, Collins finally came face-to-face with Langston. He was calm and composed, confident that his power and influence would protect him. But Collins had one final card to play, a live broadcast of the raid, exposing Langston and the Syndicate to the world. As the broadcast went viral, Langston's empire began to crumble. His allies turned on him, and governments around the world moved to dismantle the Syndicate's operations. Collins and her team had won a major victory, but they knew that the fight was far from over. As Collins stood on the island, watching the sun rise over the horizon, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The shadows were deeper than she had ever imagined, but she had proven that even the most powerful could be brought to justice. The echoes of the case would continue to resonate, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for what was right. And for Detective Sarah Collins, the fight was just beginning. The exposure of Victor Langston and the syndicate sent shockwaves across the globe. Governments scrambled to investigate their own officials. Corporations distanced themselves from implicated executives, and the media was ablaze with headlines about the downfall of one of the world's most powerful men. Detective Sarah Collins and her team were hailed as heroes, but their victory was short-lived. Within days of the raid, Collins began receiving threats. Anonymous messages warned her to stop while she was ahead, and her nonprofit organization, Echoes of Justice, was hit by a cyber attack that wiped out years of data. It was clear that the syndicate, though weakened, was far from defeated. Someone was still pulling the strings. Collins and her team regrouped, determined to uncover who was leading the syndicate in Langston's absence. Priya Kapoor, the team's data analyst, discovered a series of encrypted communications between Langston and an unknown figure referred to only as a director. The messages hinted at a contingency plan, a fail-safe to ensure the syndicate's survival, even if its leaders were exposed. Collins realized that the director was the true mastermind, the one who had been operating in the shadows all along. But who were they, and how could they be stopped? As the team dug deeper, they began to suspect that they had a mole in their ranks. Sensitive information was leaking, and their operations were being sabotaged. Collins confronted her team, but no one admitted to betraying the group. Trust began to erode, and tensions ran high. Jack Harper, the former intelligence officer, suggested a radical solution. They would feed false information to each team member and see which piece leaked. It was a risky move, but Collins agreed. The plan worked, and the mole was revealed: Marcus Reed, the investigative journalist. Collins was devastated. Marcus had been a trusted ally, someone she relied on to expose the truth. Under interrogation, Marcus confessed that he had been blackmailed by the syndicate. They had threatened his family, forcing him to leak information. He begged for forgiveness, but Collins knew they couldn't afford to take any chances. She made the difficult decision to cut Marcus loose, but not before extracting every piece of information he had about the syndicate's operations. Marcus revealed that the director was planning a major operation to regain control, codenamed Phoenix Rising. Phoenix Rising was a coordinated effort to destabilize global markets, sow chaos, and create a power vacuum that the syndicate could exploit. The operation involved cyber attacks, assassinations, and the manipulation of key political figures. Collins knew they had to act fast to stop it. She reached out to her contacts in the intelligence community, but many were reluctant to help. The syndicate's reach was vast, and no one wanted to risk becoming a target. Collins realized that she would have to rely on her small, trusted team once again. Priya Kapoor proposed a bold plan. They would infiltrate the syndicate's digital infrastructure and disrupt Phoenix Rising from within. Using Marcus's information, they identified a weak point in the syndicate's cybersecurity: a server farm in Iceland that served as a hub for their operations. The team traveled to Iceland, where they launched a daring hack. Priya and Jack worked tirelessly to bypass the syndicate's defenses, while Collins kept watch for any signs of trouble. After hours of intense effort, they managed to gain access to the server farm. Inside the server farm, the team discovered a trove of data detailing Phoenix Rising. But they also found something even more shocking: a list of high-profile individuals who were secretly working with the syndicate. The list included politicians, CEOs, and even a prominent humanitarian. Collins realized that the syndicate's influence was even more pervasive than she had imagined. They had infiltrated every level of society, using their power to manipulate events on a global scale. The team downloaded the data and prepared to expose it to the world. As the team prepared to leave the server farm, they were ambushed by syndicate operatives. A fierce firefight broke out, and the team was forced to fight their way out. Jack Harper was injured in the confrontation, but they managed to escape with the data. Back at their safe house, Collins tended to Jack's wounds while Priya worked to decrypt the data. The information they had recovered was explosive, but they knew they had to act quickly before the syndicate could cover their tracks. Collins and her team decided to bypass traditional media and release the data directly to the public. They created a secure website, and uploaded the documents, along with a video explaining the truth about the syndicate and Phoenix Rising. The website went viral within hours, and the world was once again in uproar. Governments were forced to act, launching investigations and arrests. The syndicate's operations were disrupted, and Phoenix Rising was thwarted. But Collins knew that the director was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. With the syndicate in disarray, Collins turned her attention to finding the director. Using the data they had recovered, she and her team began piecing together clues about their identity. The trail led them to a remote estate in the Swiss Alps, where they believed the director was hiding. The team launched a covert operation to infiltrate the estate. What they found inside was beyond anything they could have imagined. A high-tech command center filled with monitors and servers. And at the center of it all was a figure shrouded in shadow. As Collins stepped forward, the figure turned to face her. The director was someone she had never expected, a face from her past, someone she had trusted. The revelation was a gut punch, but Collins knew that this was the moment she had been fighting for. The final confrontation was about to begin. Detective Sarah Collins froze as the figure in the shadows stepped into the light. The director was none other than Eleanor Blackwood, the reclusive financier who had cooperated with Collins years earlier to expose the first layer of the embezzlement scheme. Collins was stunned. Eleanor had been a victim, a whistleblower, or so she had claimed. Now, she stood before Collins as the mastermind behind the syndicate. Eleanor smiled coldly. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you, Sarah? The syndicate is bigger than Langston, bigger than me. It's an idea, and ideas don't die." Eleanor revealed that she had been playing a long game. Her earlier cooperation with Collins had been a calculated move to eliminate her rivals within the syndicate, including Victor Langston. With Langston out of the way, Eleanor had seized control, using her intelligence and resources to rebuild the organization even stronger. She taunted Collins, revealing that the data the team had leaked to the public was incomplete. The syndicate's true power lay in its ability to adapt and evolve. "You've only scratched the surface," Eleanor said. "The syndicate is everywhere. And now, thanks to you, we're untouchable." Collins realized too late that they had walked into a trap. The estate was rigged with explosives, and Eleanor had no intention of letting them leave alive. As alarms blared, the team scrambled to escape. Jack Harper, still injured, insisted on staying behind to buy them time. "Go," he shouted. "I'll hold them off." Collins, Priya, and Marcus fought their way through syndicate operatives, narrowly escaping the estate as it erupted in flames behind them. Jack's fate was unknown, but Collins vowed to make Eleanor pay for what she had done. The team regrouped at a safe house, shaken but determined. Collins knew that Eleanor would go underground, and finding her again would be nearly impossible. But they had one advantage. Priya had managed to download a portion of the syndicate's data before the estate was destroyed. The data contained clues about Eleanor's next move, a plan to destabilize global financial markets using a sophisticated algorithm. The algorithm, codenamed Black Swan, could trigger a worldwide economic collapse, allowing the syndicate to seize control of key industries and governments. Collins and her team knew they had to stop Black Swan before it was activated. The algorithm was set to launch in 72 hours, and they had no idea where Eleanor was or how to stop her. They divided their efforts. Priya worked to reverse engineer the algorithm, while Collins and Marcus tracked down leads on Eleanor's location. The trail led them to a secret facility in the Arctic, where Eleanor was rumored to be overseeing the final stages of Black Swan. The team prepared for a final, desperate mission to stop her. The team traveled to the Arctic, braving freezing temperatures and treacherous terrain. The facility was heavily guarded, with state-of-the-art security systems. Using their combined skills, they managed to infiltrate the facility, but not without casualties. Marcus was captured, leaving Collins and Priya to face Eleanor alone. Inside the facility, they found a massive server room, humming with activity. Eleanor stood at the center, overseeing the final preparations for Black Swan. She greeted Collins with a smirk. "You're too late, Sarah. The algorithm is already in motion." Collins and Priya launched a desperate attempt to stop Black Swan. Priya worked to disable the servers, while Collins confronted Eleanor. The two women engaged in a tense, physical struggle, each fighting for their vision of the future. As they fought, Priya managed to upload a virus into the system, disrupting the algorithm. But Eleanor had a backup plan, a manual override that would trigger Black Swan regardless. Collins, realizing what was at stake, made a split-second decision. She tackled Eleanor, sending them both crashing into the control panel. The facility began to collapse, alarms blaring as the systems overloaded. Collins and Priya barely escaped, leaving Eleanor behind as the facility was consumed in flames. The team returned home, battered but victorious. Black Swan had been stopped, and the syndicate's operations were in disarray. But the costs had been high. Jack Harper's fate remained unknown, and Marcus had been killed during the mission. Collins was hailed as a hero once again, but she felt no sense of triumph. The syndicate might have been weakened, but it was far from destroyed. And Eleanor's final words haunted her. The syndicate is an idea, and ideas don't die. Collins decided to take a step back from the fight, at least for a while. She focused on rebuilding echoes of justice, using the data they had recovered to help victims of corruption and financial crimes. Priya Kapoor became the organization's new head of cybersecurity, ensuring that they would be ready for whatever came next. But Collins knew that her work wasn't done. The syndicate was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And as long as it existed, she would be there to fight it. As Collins stood before Maggie Thompson's memorial one last time, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Maggie's bravery had inspired her to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. And now, Collins had become a symbol of that same courage and determination. The fight against corruption was far from over, but Collins knew that she wasn't alone. There were others out there fighting for justice in their own ways. And together, they would continue to shine a light into shadows, no matter how dark they became. The echoes of the case would continue to resonate, inspiring others to stand up against corruption and fight for what was right. And for Detective Sarah Collins, the fight was just beginning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more crazy crime stories, make sure to hit that like button. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. What crime shocked you the most? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. More insane stories are coming your way. Follow us for more on your social media handles, if any, and check out our next video here. Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.